10 years ago, the Ontario government created the Greenbelt. It's a protected swath of green space surrounding Canada's fastest growing region, the Greater Toronto Area, and wraps around the Golden Horseshoe. 10 years later, the Ontario government asked former Toronto Mayor David Crombie to study whether the plan to protect all that green space is working and to come up with some recommendations if it isn't. Those recommendations are due out in a matter of weeks, so we thought we'd gather some Greenbelt observers to find out what they'd like to see going forward. And with that, we welcome Marcy Birchfield. She's Executive Director of the Neptis Foundation. That's an independent research group focused on urban growth and management. Keith Curry is here. He's Vice President of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. And Joe Vaccaro is here. He is CEO of the Ontario Home Builders Association. And it's great to have you three here in our studio tonight for a chat about something that's now 10 years old. In fact, if we can, Sheldon, let's show the map here. This is what we're talking about. If you live outside the GTA, you may be less familiar. That's what it was 10 years ago. The Greenbelt on the northwest corner of Lake Ontario, wrapping around Hamilton, coming underneath the south side of Lake Ontario as well. 7,300 square kilometers. It's one of the largest greenbelts anywhere in the world. And I think, Marcy, maybe we should just start with some background here. When the McGuinty government put this together 10 years ago, what was the overarching mission of what it wanted to accomplish?
So it really came out of a campaign promise that McGuinty made to set aside 1 million acres that's a big number, 1 million acres of land to put it under permanent agricultural, put it under permanent protection from urban development. That was the juxtaposition was.
So prevent sprawl, in other words.
That's right.
We want to protect this land. We don't want urban sprawl here.
That's right. And so the land contains, the land area contains some of the best prime agricultural land in Canada. It contains natural heritage features such as wetlands and woodlands, river valleys, and areas of natural and scientific interest. And it was really created as a legacy for all Ontarians and built on the preservation and conservation legacies of previous governments. Because it does include the Oak Ridges Moraine that was brought in under Premier Mike Harris in 2001. And it also includes the Niagara Escarpment Plan, which was brought in under Premier Bill Davis in 1973. And so it was the Liberals' attempt to add on to that legacy, I think, that conservation legacy.
Gotcha. Keith, how did they determine what went, because these lines obviously had to be drawn by lots of experts. How did they decide what went in the Greenbelt? How did they decide what didn't need to go into the Greenbelt?
Well, that topic has certainly been a matter of discussion for a number of years, especially when the Greenbelt was first established. And realistically, you'd have to speak to the government to see how they came down to their final indication of where the Greenbelt was going to be, the lines. Some of it was natural boundaries, such as trees or rivers. Some of it was municipal boundaries. Some of it was road boundaries. Some of it was where the property lines laid, and so that's really how they determined where it went. Overarching, it was to more or less surround the entire GTA, and as Marcy alluded to, also include the 3 previous land use plans that were in place at the time.
There were some allegations at the time that while science, pure science, was going to determine what went in and what didn't go in, maybe a little political science actually went into the drawing of the boundaries. You want to say yes or no to that?
I don't know is the right answer, because I really don't know. There's lots of, as I say, there's lots of talk out there of how some people got in, some people didn't. At the end of the day, the government made the decision, and that's where we're at today.
Okay. Joe, were you satisfied as a guy who represents home builders in the province of Ontario? And I guess I should say, full disclosure off the top here, my brother's one of them, runs a company, a home building company in Hamilton. Were housing developers, generally speaking, pleased, not pleased? Content, not content with what went in and what didn't go in the Greenbelt?
I think what's important to remember here is that it was part of a campaign commitment. It was a consolidation of a number of other plans. But I think what's important to remember is that, and what people tend to forget is, although you have a Greenbelt, the complementary piece of legislation that came forward with it was the growth plan. And that's where our industry and our members have really been focused on, is making that growth plan work. And so what you have to understand is whatever's not in the Greenbelt is in the growth plan and vice versa. So, we tend to spend more time talking about the need to get the growth plan right, trying to figure out exactly how we're going to build our communities to 2041, which is the sort of the next horizon for planning. Talking about how we make the growth plan a better economic plan, how we bring more housing supply to the market, how we support transit-oriented communities. We tend to spend our time talking about that, because as you start thinking about where you want growth to happen, how do we get involved with community building, region building, you start understanding the right places for development to happen, and that helps you sort of set where should be the boundaries for things like a Greenbelt and an Oak Ridge Moraine.
Okay, I get that, but as a principle, as a general principle, are home builders okay with the idea that there should be some places in this province where you ought not to be able to build homes because it's pristine landscape or whatever?
Absolutely. I mean, we're not here to fight the Greenbelt. We're here to see how it's going to work moving forward to 2041. I don't spend much time thinking about the old battles. I think about the future and what we need to plan towards. That should be the focus of the work we're trying to do here. When you think about the level of investment the provincial government's putting into transit, highways, and other things, that should be the focus of sort of the community building, region building we should be involved in. And again, it takes us back to connecting the dots between a Greenbelt, a growth plan, where community building should happen, how do we attract jobs. All those pieces come together. So as you connect those dots, you sort of have a better sense of how this should work. And so for our membership, we've said from day one, we're not here to fight the Greenbelt. We're going to make it work. We do have a view that expansion should be based on a scientific basis. We think that's where you should start the conversation. There should be a process so landowners can be involved, be them farmers or developers or ratepayers. But we always say to the government, at some point you got to get back to a conversation about the growth plan.
Okay.
And that's where we want to take the conversation.
We'll start picking that apart as we go forward. Should the Greenbelt be even bigger than it is right now? I know you said it's huge, but should it be bigger even?
So the academic literature on these types of policy tools actually suggests that there is more pressure put on lands outside of Greenbelts than may have existed already. So that actually is something that we put on the table in our draft commentary on the draft Greenbelt plan. So it suggested that the Greenbelt, with its original boundaries, did not include lands like South Simcoe County, which is just north of the GTA, north of the Greater Toronto Area, and just northeast of the Greenbelt boundary. And so at the time that the Greenbelt was created, there was immense pressure for growth in that area, for what one would term as leapfrog development, where development is going well beyond the existing urban area, and suggestions of towns as big as 50,000 people in the middle of a potato field. So that's the kind of thing that the Greenbelt was really up against. It was responding to that situation.
Sounds to me like you think, yes, Greenbelt should be bigger.
Well, I think the proponents of expansion of the Greenbelt understand that it's an effective policy tool to preserve agricultural land, to preserve natural features for a long time, and to protect things from urban development in the long term. But I think that part of what the Greenbelt doesn't necessarily do is that it is not the only thing that stops sprawl. It was sold as a sprawl stopper, but it's not the only thing that stops sprawl.
Because sprawl leapfrogs.
That's right.
It jumps right over the Greenbelt and continues on.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Let me try this, Keith. Should we make a hard and fast decision in the province of Ontario that whatever is farmland today, because we need it, should always be farmland going forward?
The quick and short answer to that is no, because you have to ask yourself, what are we protecting it for? Farming and agriculture is much bigger than just the protection of the land. It's the protection of the entire agriculture system. I referred to it many times as being an agriculture community, if that makes more sense. Because we not only need the land for us to produce food on, but we need all the complementary services that go along with it. If you're in livestock, you need the veterinarians, you need the feed suppliers, you need the grain dealers and the grain elevators, you need equipment dealers, etc. So if the agriculture community is not healthy, then protecting the farmland for the sake of protecting the farmland won't accomplish that goal, because the farmers will not be able to be economically viable.
Does that mean you think farmers ought to be able to sell their land to Joe's members whenever they want to?
I'm not going to get in the way of a private individual's business with respect to selling or not selling land. That's up to the individual, and it's hard to get mad at somebody for selling the land for a lot of money. I think if everyone was in that position, they would probably do the same thing. Our view as an organization is we want to protect agricultural land. We want it to stop being paved over and built on. We've actually had soils that have gone extinct in Ontario because they've been built on and paved over. So the land around the GTA is primarily all Class 1 land, which is the best farming land in Ontario, and we're losing it at a rapid pace. 350 acres a day are being lost to development. So our goal is to protect farmland, but it's also to protect the farm system, the agriculture system, and the farmers.
Are you building too many homes on land that ought to stay farmland, but the farmers are selling to you guys?
I mean, when you go back 10 years and you think about where we are today, the one great thing the Greenbelt and the growth plan have done together, really focused development. You now have a very clear path for where development is going to work, where it's not going to work. So purchasing of the land by itself is not what's going to get you into a development opportunity. Are you on a serviced area? Is there highway access? Is there transit? So water, wastewater. And then there's all the environmental features involved. So for those people involved with development, the decision to purchase land or try to bring land into development starts with an environmental assessment. I mean, you start there and you work your way out to figure out whether or not there's even an opportunity there. And then all the services that have to come with that. So, I mean, these two plans have really become the cornerstone of progressive planning in Ontario. I mean, you have to start understanding how these plans work together before you make a purchase decision. And one of the challenges we have from a development perspective is that we see provincial governments and municipal governments investing in services, putting GO stations in suburban rural areas. Well, that GO station will facilitate a path to development. So they've made that investment, and the expectation from the neighboring community is, well, you're going to grow to support the transit now in that area. And so when you see things like in South Simcoe, Waterloo region, other areas where you see transit being improved upon, it's now a path of development. And so it's not simply about turning over agricultural land into development. There is now a fundamental shift in how we do planning in the province based on these two plans. The Greenbelt tells you where you can't grow. The growth plan tells you where you do grow. So the balancing act is trying to figure out, okay, where are the right areas to grow, because it is a growing region. I mean,
so let's figure that out. Joni, I'm going to quote that famous urban planner, Joni Mitchell. I think I called you Joni. I meant Marcy. Marcy, I'm going to quote that famous urban planner, Joni Mitchell, who said, you know, you can't pave paradise and put up a parking lot everywhere, right? So are we in danger of doing that?
So I think, so we have to house 100,000 people per year, every year in this region. That's how fast we're growing. We're growing by 100,000 people per year.
Year after year.
Year after year.
They're coming
every
here.
Year, yes.
They got to live somewhere.
They've got to live somewhere. And so to that point, what people don't quite understand is that our current existing urban boundary, so the edge of our communities essentially in the GTA and Hamilton and elsewhere in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, they do not butt up against the Greenbelt. There are kilometers and kilometers of space between the existing urban area and the Greenbelt boundary. And further, what people do not understand is that planning policies exist that require municipalities to plan for growth 20 to 25 years ahead of time. And so there is another 107,000 hectares of land that's been already designated for development, for future urban development, both from the employment side and the residential side, until 2031. And even the edge of that invisible boundary, because that's not built yet, that is, again, in most cases, kilometers and kilometers away from the Greenbelt.
Can I make sure I understand what you're saying? Are you saying that we already have plenty of developable land, not in the Greenbelt, not near the Greenbelt even, as long as we intensify our development where we are?
Our research shows that we can build new communities on land that is not already urbanized and intensify our existing communities, essentially, and still not need to go into the Greenbelt. But the Greenbelt may be able to, if we use our land more efficiently, if we intensify, as Joe is suggesting, in areas where we're investing in transit, that is a no-brainer. That is how we build a 21st century city region. If we do that sort of thing, we may even be able to grow the Greenbelt.
You sign on with that?
Well, I absolutely agree that there is space for growth. And if you look at the map you put up earlier, you'll see an area called, we refer to it as the White Belt.
Let's put it up. Actually, it's a good idea. Sheldon, if we can, let's put it up. All right, tell me what you're referring to with the White Belt.
Well, I guess
it's yellow.
It's yellow.
It's yellow there. Okay.
That yellow area. So those are lands that are not green belted, but are not part of any official plan at this point. So the opportunity in those areas is to think about how do we, as we move forward. I mean, in 2041, the province tells us that there's going to be 13 million plus people in the region.
13 million in 2041, compared to what, at 5.5 million today?
Well, we're at 9.5.
Yeah.
Well,
so we're looking
I guess
at
depends how you.
For the region.
For the region. For the whole thing.
For the region, right?
Oh, Greater Golden Horseshoe. Okay, I got you.
So when you look at that map, and you think regionally, we need to add 50. We have to plan for 50% more people coming here.
So you want to build in that yellow area as well.
So when you think about how you're going to accommodate that growth, the challenge becomes, okay, where do you put those people? It's going to be a combination of building in the existing communities And there are challenges there, right? There are challenges, people fighting mid-rise towers, urban townhouses in downtown Toronto, the condos in Toronto. You have challenges in terms of converting private golf courses into mixed-use housing developments. I mean, these are areas and opportunities in existing boundaries where you have those challenges. So that pressure to accommodate those has to find its place somewhere else. And so the whole planning process revolves around the idea that we have a framework provincially. That framework really is grounded in numbers, population, employment. Those municipalities are left with the responsibility to say, okay, now plan your community around these numbers. So in some communities, they look at those numbers and say, look, we can put 40% in condos or in towers, but the other 60% of these people are going to live in a suburban environment. So we're going to expand, and we're going to expand, but the planning regime we're in now requires much more intensified housing stock. I mean, if you drive into new subdivisions, you'll see we're not building homes like we did back in the 70s when Joni Mitchell was belting out this classic. It's a whole different new world. And I think it's important to understand that. I mean, I always say that we are building communities today better than ever before, number one.
Better defined how?
In terms of the planning, in terms of the transit requirements, in terms of the features, parks. When a new community comes to an existing community, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it improving the quality of life of everyone involved? The new parks, the new schools, and new services. I would say it is. But the other side of that is that we deserve the best communities. And so part of this entire exercise around Greenbelt and Growth Plan is how are we building the best communities moving forward?
Can I get your view on all of that, what we've been discussing here?
Well, Marcy was right in that the developing world has made it clear that there's enough building room in the existing areas for the next 30 years, give or take, depending on when the population actually gets here. Because that we don't know. There's different numbers depending on what minister you talk to, but we're assuming 3 million over the next 30 years. And they already are saying that there's enough room right now to build without expanding urban boundaries. The White Belt, as Joe pointed out, is an area set aside for beyond that time when we are going to need urban expansion. The problem for the White Belt from an agriculture perspective is if you take a look at that physical geographic location, it's very difficult to operate any kind of agriculture in a normal fashion. You're dealing with traffic, you're dealing with noise, people complaining about noise and dust, you're dealing with property rights as far as people trespassing and littering, and people, when the Greenbelt first came out, due to a really unique ad campaign, I'll say, people thought of this as a great parkland, so we'll just camp there for the weekend. So there's all kinds of those issues that people in really inside urban areas are dealing with that's really problematic.
Meaning that they have misconceptions about what actually goes on in the Greenbelt?
Well, misconceptions and understanding, yes, they want to support the agriculture and the farm community. They just don't want it in their backyard because it makes noise, it makes smells, it makes sounds, it makes dust, and they're in the way. We have farmers that are driving machinery in the middle of the night into their property in order to be able to work on that property and then driving back out in the middle of the night. That's just not right. Planners don't design for farm machinery anywhere in their infrastructure. The transportation infrastructure isn't designed for agriculture equipment, especially in today's world where it's huge. So those are all the struggles that agriculture is dealing with in the real near urban areas. I will say that my experience is, especially on the inner ring of the Greenbelt, developers have done a very good job of intensification. They are meeting the density targets quite well at this point in time. The problem is they are just density targets. So when you get outside of the inner circle, those density targets aren't necessarily met the same way they are on the inner circle. And that becomes problematic from a sprawl perspective.
Let me ask Marcy about that, because I must say that a lot of the feedback I get, and you can tell me if this is accurate or not, a lot of the feedback I get is that while people like you, urban planners, love the notion of intensifying the major transit nodes, for example. We're at one right here, Yonge and Eglinton, and right in the middle of Toronto. They love the idea of intensifying development here. It's better for services, better for the environment, better for planning, better for everything. Put the people where the transit is, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there's still a ton of people out there who want to live in the suburbs in a big home with two-car garage and, in a cul-de-sac and that whole thing. And local politicians get that. They understand that if they want to get reelected, they have to appeal to what the citizens want. And a lot of citizens want that suburban lifestyle. Do we have a clash here that is not resolvable?
So let me just correct you, and I'm not an urban planner, I'm a geographer. I'm an urban geographer. So I will just say that one of the things that NEPTIS does, and NEPTIS does well, and that the government should actually be doing more of, is measure. So we have measured the growth rate, essentially, of the urban boundary, of the urban footprint, let's call it, over the last, 50 years or so. And more recently, what we have seen is that we are actually urbanizing at a rate that is slower than we had in the past, meaning that our urban footprint is slowing down in terms of its growth, in terms of its rate of growth.
Okay.
But we are accommodating the same number of people. And this is not happening just in the Toronto region. This has been happening all over Canada in the big metropolitan region. We're growing at the same pace, but we're actually urbanizing less land. And what this signals, essentially, is a change in housing market demand.
So intensification is happening.
Intensification is definitely happening, and people are wanting to live in a more urbanized environment. And to enjoy the amenities of an urbanized environment, to get away from having 2, 3, 4 cars to get around, and being able to rely on transit. And the only way that you can bring transit into communities is having a certain amount of density. That doesn't mean we have towers everywhere. There are things called gentle density, which Pembina and OHBA put out a recent report that talks about gentle density, mid-rises, towns and things like that, laneway housing.
Let me jump in there though. Mid-rises, okay, mid-rises. We're talking what, like 8-story, something like that?
It can be anywhere from 4. It can be anywhere from 4 to 8 stories.
Okay, what I hear from local politicians is, I have neighborhoods of bungalows and maybe 2-story homes. And for them, a mid-rise of 8 stories being plunked down, even at a major intersection near where they're living, is not acceptable. So again, do we not have a clash here that is a little tough to resolve?
But I think what politicians have to remember is our communities are constantly changing. So by that, our demographics in our communities are constantly changing. People who, at some point in the very near future, we are going to have more people over 65 than we are going to have children under 16. That's a stat that's actually that we are going to have to confront. And those folks who are over 65, maybe they don't want to take care of a single family house or a large house. And the other thing that's growing is there's a growing number of single-headed households. One person living in a household. Again, the market is shifting to accommodate these trends.
Okay. In our, we got a little less than 10 minutes here to go. We mentioned off the top, David Crombie, the former mayor of Toronto, is chairing this task force, which has been looking at all of these issues around the Greenbelt. And lo and behold, somebody who may be on that panel may be on this program right now. Hello. You're on the Crombie panel.
Correct.
So you know what has been discussed. You may even know what all the recommendations are at this point, do you?
Yes, I might know.
You might know. Care to give us a hint about what's going to be announced later this month?
I think you're going to be very encouraged by the report. It was very thorough. A lot of input from really good qualified people around the panel, and we were responding to the concerns that we saw throughout the stakeholder sessions that were held early in the spring. And that's as far as I'll go now because the report's not released yet.
I was going to say, I listened very intently and carefully, and I didn't hear any recommendations coming out of your mouth there, Keith.
Well, I recommend that you read it when it comes out.
Okay. Understanding that you're probably going to stay mum now, Joe, what would you like to see in the recommendations about Greenbelt's 10 years old? What do we do for the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Again, we take the perspective of we need to look forward to 2041, the next horizon. I think the discussion we had here around development and where housing is going to happen and where people are going to happen and how we make that happen is the key to all this. I mean, we have said from day one that the growth plan needs to be an economic development plan. It needs to not just be about attracting and holding people who want to come here. It's also about attracting jobs. And that's the one piece that continues to be missed in the conversation. It's like, okay, well, the people are coming, let's house them. Okay, but where are the jobs to support those people? And so that's, I think, part of the general discussion around infrastructure and transit. So, we've said to the government that as you move forward on this growth plan, Greenbelt, because Chair Crombie is reviewing all the plans, we've said, make the growth plan work through pre-zoning and smart zoning of your transit corridors. If you're going to invest in Hamilton and LRT line in Hamilton, you should pre-zone that corridor. Add some density to it so that developers can come in and have a starting point instead of working backwards in terms of those local community groups will say, I'm not comfortable with 6 stories, I'd rather see 4. But the line in place requires a certain amount of transit ridership.
So if you're going to have $1 billion LRT going down the main street of your community, probably a good idea to have some decent housing built near it.
And as you said,
intensified.
Exactly. And as you said, one of the challenges is local communities' opposition to it, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
And government has to do a better job of expressing to residents why their community is changing. The decisions we've made between the Greenbelt and the growth plan, how they work and how they affect you and your community. So we've said to the government and through the Crombie Crombie report and the panel members, there has to be an aggressive campaign by the government to explain to people why the community is changing. And then you have to be in there when these things are moving forward. You have to be in there with pre-zoning and smart zoning. Along with that, we said, to make the plan work as an economic development plan, you need to make some adjustments so that there's an employment opportunity there, so that employers who want to come here and start up companies find it to be a welcoming place. And I'm always reminded of Atlanta, where if they have an investment opportunity and someone comes in saying, I'm going to put up a factory, they don't let those people leave until they get the deal done. They sit down, they work out all the mapping, and they present to them the deal and the economics. And that's how you hold investment and create investment-ready communities.
I'll give you one more recommendation, then I'm going to go over to Marcy.
I guess the last recommendation is, we've been saying the Greenbelt is a great opportunity. It is a great opportunity if we do something with it. And one of the things we've said is you need to start thinking about creating a smart Greenbelt. How do we get private investment to invest in wetlands, woodlots, to turn the Greenbelt into a climate change fighter? How did you do that? Create more points of public access. As Keith said earlier, people treat the Greenbelt like it's a public park. It's not. It's privately owned. So the question is, how do you get private ownership, farmers, homeowners, ratepayers, developers, municipalities, to invest in those features, improve them?
Is that doable, Keith?
Well, in concept, it's doable. Is it practical given the geography we're dealing with today? It's very difficult. On the perimeters of the urban areas, it may be possible to make that happen. What Joe's talking about makes a lot of sense from a transit and all-inclusive, but you talked about creating wetlands, and we've lost almost all of our wetland area in the Greenbelt area. It's been gone, and that's largely due to development. And developers think that they can just move wetland, and what they're not understanding is wetlands is one word, not wet lands, two words. Big difference in how they function. And wetlands going forward they're going to play a huge part in our whole climate change discussions because they're very, very significant and important. We as farmers, we know the ecological benefits of wetlands and are all for preserving them, as are the natural heritage systems that are important to our systems. But we have to make it all work. We only have one landscape out there. And everything that we do has to be accommodated by that one landscape. And at the end of the day, who's the big winner? It's always going to be Mother Nature. She's going to tell you what's going to happen. So can we make it work? I don't think we have a choice. I think we have to make it work. I think the struggle that our organization has and we as farmers have is that everything we do is based on urban planning and urban development. And everything else has to fit around it. And at times, from an agriculture perspective, we get tired of being the losers all the time. We're always the ones that have to give in, give up. We give everything back because well, we just have to build there. We just have to build there. We have to put transit there. We have to do this and we do that. Wouldn't it be better to figure out where the best place is to build and leave the good stuff alone? That makes more sense.
Have you been able to persuade people of that view?
Oh, it's not from a lack of trying, that's for sure. I got kicked off my soapbox a few times during the discussions, but it is important. I think our population understands the importance of local food and how important secure food is as well. We do it as well as anybody in the world right here in Southern Ontario, and I think the fact that we are able to do it and should be able to continue to do it, that's why we have the need for smart growth, smart planning going forward.
Gotcha. Greenbelt is 10 years old. What would you like to see going forward the next quarter century as part of the recommendations?
As part of the recommendations, even though you talked about the Greenbelt, I would actually like to see a shift in the focus to the growth plan. As Joe and both Keith have mentioned, how important that is to getting growth right. And essentially, if you get the growth plan right, the Greenbelt will be a success and will be protected, and it may even be able to grow. But I think the big thing that we need to do is shift our thinking, both from the planning perspective and the political perspective. We need to shift our thinking around how do we build communities and accommodate growth both on the employment side and on the residential side that's going to align with these big transit investments. And Joe and Keith both spoke very eloquently about that. But the other thing I think that the growth plan needs to recognize is these rural areas outside of the Greenbelt and these rural areas outside of the existing urban boundary and the future urban boundary. And bring them into the economy, bring them part of the economy. Do not, for too long, we've been seeing these lands as lands in waiting for urban development. And we need to get past that. We need to shift our thinking around that if we're truly going to shift our thinking into more intensified city building
regions. And I think that what the panel needs to think about is these big ideas, and get the government on board with these big ideas and really make the Greater Golden Horseshoe, or the Toronto region, I'd like to call it, because it is focused, it is centered on Toronto, and its suburban areas and the rural areas are all part of this larger urban region. Let's make it a model for the 21st century, essentially, and a model that others around the world want to emulate.
Well, you have been model guests, I can certainly say that. Can I thank the three of you for coming in and helping us better understand the issues around the Greenbelt and the growth plan. Marcy Birchfield from the Neptus Foundation, Keith Curry from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, Joe Vaccaro, Ontario Home Builders Association. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.